ingenious supplies.
What's up, Spikes? Today we're talking about Lorwyn deck building, but before we get into that, we have to talk about our sponsors. As always, Gamegenic, we have brand new Lorwyn accessories featuring all the great artwork from Lorwyn directly on your binders, sleeves, deck boxes, everything you could possibly want. And Star City Games, whenever you're selling cards, make sure to sell them at starcitygames.com. Also, you can pick up our Gamegenic merchandise on their website. Great place if you live in the States, better shipping rate. And also, like normal, Moxfield. Throughout the video, there'll be little QR codes that are going to pop up of a variety of deck lists we're going to talk about. Scan those to get a link directly to that deck list. So Lorwyn deck building. Wizards sent over the assets, and we had about a week and a half, like we normally have, to kind of find what we like, don't like, what stands out, put 7 decks together, and then jam into a championship. And it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to go over in a pretty small window. And yeah, I'm going to go over things that we liked or disliked or things that stood out. This set featured only 16 legends, which is a lot fewer than normal, and something I was definitely worried about going into the set. Also, it was a set featuring a lot of kindred and specific creature type cards, which obviously took up a pretty big share of the legends as well, and card pool. This is something that I think about a lot, but like, do we want to just build 6 or 7 kindred decks? Is that fun or entertaining? Is that something that people would want to watch? Also, there's the cycle of double-faced legendary creatures also featured in each creature type as well, that looked definitely at first glance a little underwhelming, and I was unsure how they would perform. We'll get into that a little bit later, but thankfully they ended up doing a little better than expected. There was a severe lack of previously supported creature types like fairies, tree folk, some amount of giants. But again, something that we thought was odd, but again, thought of a lot of time to think about it. We have to kind of turn it around pretty quick. Right away, we noticed that the evoke elementals, which were kind of featured pretty early in the set, spoiler, were not going to be super good in Commander because they don't really care so much about ETB. It's all about how much mana you pay into them. Can't really use it so much. Definitely built more for constructed, so I could avoid those as a whole. But overall, me and all the Spikes were definitely impressed with the set design overall. Like the special guests as a whole, like the papercraft artwork was phenomenal. The set design was phenomenal. It was really easy to get kind of intoxicated with the set, just like from the design standpoint alone. That left us with a handful of cards. There had been a handful of cards already spoiled at that point. We decided to go with 7 different decks, like we did again, like normal. Doran Toughness, Ashling, Big Mana, Grub, Goblins, High Perfect Morcant, Elves. That's a nice one. Bree, Life Gain, Sig, Merfolk, and Kuril Enter the Battlefield triggers. We're pretty happy with how they all flushed out, but again, there are certain sacrifices we made because of the time constraint and certain things we didn't do. But before we get into that, I want to talk about kind of the initial impressions of cards that stood out to us. So like I said, out of the commanders we had access to, 3 stood out more than the rest, and that was High Perfect Morcant, Kryl Attentive First Year, and Doran Besieged by Time. So 2 of them had already been spoiled for quite a while, so a lot of people were, it was already on people's minds. But the Doran is a classic, like Philly, we've mentioned in our gameplay video, which you haven't watched it, you should, because it's gonna hurt Phil's feelings if you haven't. Doran was in the timeline of when Commander was kind of first taking off, and it was one of the cool, really good builder around your deck commanders at the time, which there wasn't that many of back then. You kind of just chose a legendary creature in your colors and ran with it. Unlike now, where commanders are very build around your commander focused. So those are the 3 that we thought were gonna be very popular from the set, and for the most part, other than Kryl, which actually ended up being quite the miss. Both High Perfect Morcant and Doran definitely very popular. And then again, going through the set as well, outside of just commanders, we have to find out kind of flag cards that I think are very interesting for deck building that I want to make sure I include because I think they're interesting or will be popular cards within the set after the fact. Cards like Curious Colossus, Aurora Awakener, Mirror Form, Hexing Squelcher, and Formidable Speaker. The last 2, a little, just more efficient than flashy, but still popular, nonetheless. And then, yeah, the Kindred cards as well. Like, obviously, this being a big Kindred set, it has Collective Inferno, Chronicle of Victory, Gathering Stone, like these really good, well-rounded, fit in a lot of different Kindred type decks that we're excited to showcase as well. And again, being a Kindred set, really easy to slot into multiple decks. So with everything in front of us, we built 7 decks, and we ran it through our new set Gauntlet like we normally have. Again, if you haven't seen it, we typically run this 4-round Swiss tournament where we take the winner of each game and then play them in a championship at the end. If you haven't checked it out, be sure to do. It's a ton of fun. It's a good way to feature a lot of new cards in the set, a lot of new commanders. And yeah, it's been a big part of what we've been doing now for the last year and a half, 2 years now. So again, with the 7 decks, like I mentioned, you always kind of hope for the best. And because we have to turn them around so fast, I would definitely build them and hope that they play as well as I think they're going to play. And there are some things that, go good and bad. Like I talked in the 2025 year in review video. If you haven't seen it, I go pretty in depth about a lot of decision making that I make in that video. But a lot of that kind of resonates here, I was worried definitely that a lot of the double-faced commanders would be kind of underpowered. They looked like they were definitely leaning a little more towards constructed, standard, stuff like that. Thankfully, at least Grub played a lot better than expected. Sig was even fine. I wish that I had a different build for that list, and I'll go into that a little later. But most of them played pretty good. I also wish I then maybe built the Kithkin commander, but again, we'll get more of the, wish I would have done after a little later. Ashling played a lot better than expected. The curve of play Ashling on 2, flip it turn 3 into a Urgolem's Eye effect, lets you untap for 8 mana turn 4. It's pretty good, unsurprising. It wasn't an elemental deck, but if you have 8 mana turn 4, it's pretty hard to beat. And even then, once they remove your commander, as long as you have the turn 2 to set up, facilitate what you need to do to start playing your 8, 9, 10 mana spells, and that's super fun. What's there not to like about that? High Perfect Morcant was as good as I thought it was going to be, even though through trial and error, we eventually realized how that card works properly, I think. We played it wrong quite a few times, including Generous Patron not working at all with it, though still being fine. It played really well, but I guess a big part of what I was considering for this again was it's so hard to dethrone the existing kings of these Kindred decks. It's hard to beat Krenko, it's hard to beat Hackbull, it's hard to beat a Lathril or a myriad of existing good elf commanders. It's so hard to topple these giants that have been such a huge part of the format for such a long time. And especially the blue-white merfolk, how do you ever compete against Hackbull? Hackbull's so efficient, as much as I do like Sig and his weird double-faced artwork, it's hard to topple the king. So I do like High Perfect Morcant, and I do think it does play into a different element that the other elf decks don't do. However, I actually think that the deck is less fun. You don't even need to be rewarded for doing what your gameplay. You're already just playing, elf ball. You're playing a bunch of elves that are good and synergize with each other. But then your opponents also don't really have creatures because you played them all kind of for free, which, in my opinion, isn't that fun. I think if you were to lean more into the proliferate strategy and maybe start proliferating more interesting things, room for fun there. But yeah, I think Lathril, while powerful, is less exciting than existing elf commanders. But that, it's just a theory. What's the get Matt Pat in here? But yeah, most of the decks played about as well as expected, with exception of maybe Bree. Bree didn't have too good a showing either game, which is too bad because it ended up being kind of a very popular commander last minute because it was spoiled pretty late into the spoil season. Again, pretty happy overall, but we're gonna get into what I wish I could have done in the next part. So now we've played 5 games, 4 games of Swiss and the championship. And, what would I have done differently? When I build these decks, the goal is that from concept to paper, the end result will be a good representation of what that deck is or does once everyone kind of has access to that information. Because when you build a lot of these things, it's just me and the spikes and, no outside influence. You just kind of have to theory craft and figure it out on your own. Where as soon as a card gets spoiled, 2 days after, there's the entirety of the internet shoehorning ideas into one EDH rec page. And a lot easier, which I envy to a certain point for sure. So again, my goal is to hopefully not miss anything major and get a deck list that will be a good representation of that deck after the fact. Not all decks are created equally, again, we spoke about at the end of year, but I think most of these were fine. The only thing, again, I wish I had more time for was to build different versions. My initial version of Grub and Sig were very different. They were actually not goblins or merfolk at all. Sig was his blue-white evasive deck. Like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to beat the king of merfolk, so I was like, what if I took it from a different angle? Because Sig also doesn't really reward you for playing merfolk, it just happens to be a merfolk. So I built this blue-white evasive deck, a lot of unblockable creatures to take advantage of Sig drawing cards or, creatures wearing equipment. And equipment specifically, because it can't wear auras, because it gives protection from all colors. It was just pretty low to the ground, evasive, swords, Biden Thassa type effects that probably would have been more impactful, a lot more linear, though maybe it's hard to beat how linear, Kindred type decks are. But it had a little more play to it, I think. And then Grub. Grub as well, the backside of Grub does not care. The creature you copy is a goblin. It just cares that you blight when Grub attacks. So I was going to scrap the goblin plan entirely, ignore the front of the card, and just try to reanimate / sneak attack in big creatures like Archon of Cruelty and friends, and just make more copies of them. But I had a hard time convincing myself that just abandoning the front half of the card entirely to then play it, and then wait a turn to transform it, and then reanimate something while attacking with it might have been a couple too many hoops to jump through. So I thought, well, what if I could have a marriage of the two? Which probably could have existed, but again, when you have this pretty quick turnaround time, you don't really have a lot of, again, time to flush out these kind of strategies. And like I want to talk about in a second, I want to put out a good product, so I don't want to just kind of throw a bunch of stuff at a wall, it not play well at all, look bad on camera, and it being a mess of a deck list. So I ended up scrapping both versions of the decks. That being said, I do have Moxfield lists for both. They're incomplete, but I'll put them out there just in case you want to see what I was working with. Ashling, another version of Ashling that I have too. I built not everybody knows, but I often build a $25 version of any given deck and from a set if I like it a lot and I think you can build it on a budget, and Ashling was the deck that I chose for this set. I also have, again, a handful of updated deck lists for these commanders that I'm personally going to play beyond the set release, and we'll have updated deck lists as well. Again, something we typically don't do for the set, but I'll have those also in the Moxfield links. But yeah, that brings us to like what I have done differently, again, if I had more time. Outside of maybe figuring out this grub and sig list, there are other commanders that I thought would be popular, like Marlin of the Mornsong, Marlin of the new one that cares about fairies and elves. I thought that was a super interesting commander, but didn't really have the time to kind of figure out the balance of how that commander would work. I think that commander has a lot of moving parts, and figuring out the balance of like the creature types you need versus Marlin and payoffs, I would not be able to give the time that would have done that deck justice, so I ended up passing on it. Same with Ferrofor Young Yu, the green Treefolk commander in the Blight deck. I totally had forgotten that card existed until like right before recording, and I think that it was another like commander that could have been interesting as well. And Vivid. Vivid was a mechanic kind of featured in the set, but didn't really have a obvious commander to go with it. Like Aurora Awakener as a card that I thought was a standout. Earlier in the video, I think that card's cool. I think Vivid was like really close, maybe a couple cards shy of kind of having the support there. And again, there's probably some sort of big 5-color deck that can exist, but it probably would be a commander from outside the set and then kind of just be, 5-color generic good cards, which wasn't exactly what we wanted to put out. So ended up passing on it. But again, this is something that, given more time, maybe we would have figured out. This kind of like reminds me of Ragost. Ragost, one of my favorite commanders from Edge of Eternity. But again, like I said before, I have said before, that deck, even though I do love it, it required a few iterations to kind of get right. And I'm afraid of putting out these type of decks that need that extra love to kind of get to that goal. Goal is what I will choose to go with. Overall, like very happy with the set. The set is, a lot of the spikes love him, but we love it. There's a lot of commanders, even Grub is like, me, Jim, and Bill, Jim, and I, whatever proper English is. I'll like the deck quite a bit. I think we've all talked about building it. There's been a handful of commanders that, again, we've, I think more than normal that the spikes have been talking about, excited about building. Again, it just is like a great set overall, which is like a shame that it only gets one set. I think the one biggest feedback that I see online is that Lorwyn only has one set. There wasn't the second half to flesh out maybe these other creature types that were kind of forgotten. Not that, fairies and treefolk do get love in other sets, but, still would have been nice, again, which has to be great for Wizards, right? Like, hey, you're doing something right. And at least even though there are far fewer within universe sets, they seem to be killing it. The last handful have been awesome. And some of like our favorite sets from the year. Not that Universes Beyond has been bad, also been good, but again, like, the old Magic players and us definitely really appreciate when they kind of, have home runs in these, again, existing Magic IPs. So that brings us to the end of the video. We have 4 winners going into the finals. We have Kirill, Doran, Grub, and Ashling. 4 winners from the Swiss rounds. If you haven't watched it, just spoiled it for you, but go back and watch the games. They were a blast. And we have the finals coming out February 5th, so be sure to check out that video as well. And let us know if you like these kind of videos. We get a lot of feedback about more insight on deck building and stuff like that. This was a pretty quick glance at the set overall, which kind of touches on things we like, dislike, things we might have done differently. But yeah, whether it's this or maybe more of a deep dive of a specific deck, just let us know. Give us any kind of feedback is great, as long as it's positive or targeted alien. But other than that, make sure, we want to thank our sponsors, like normal, again, GameGenic, Star City Games, Moxfield. And yeah, be sure to check out the finals on February 5th.